You've heard the stories, you've seen the films, but in this final volume, we ask, what really happened? Welcome to Volume 3 of True Horror, the real stories behind the movies that haunt us. We begin with the Perron family, whose rural farmhouse held far more than cobwebs and creaking doors. This wasn't just a haunting, it was a siege, one that drove a family to the brink and revealed secrets buried under generations of silence. And it only gets darker from here. We'll explore a house where rituals may have opened something, a videotape that left a trail of obsession, and finally, the truth about what happens when art imitates death. Some horror is fiction, but some was filmed too close to the truth. There's a river town tucked between the hills of West Virginia and the fog-soaked bends of the Ohio River, a place most people have never heard of unless they've read about it in the back pages of dusty newspapers or chased urban legends down to their roots. Its name is Point Pleasant, and for 13 months between 1966 and 1967, it became the epicenter of something unexplainable, a presence, a warning, a thing with wings, eyes like burning coals, and a message too dreadful to ignore. This is not just the story behind the Mothman prophecies. This is the story of what was seen, who saw it, and the bridge that fell like a whisper into the freezing black river below. It began in the trees. November 12, 1966. The first encounter didn't happen in the streets of town. It started in the woods near Clendenin, West Virginia. 5 grave diggers were working in a rural cemetery at dusk. The light was thinning, the trees were still. Then someone looked up. Hovering above the tree line was a massive, dark figure, humanoid, with wings spread wide. They didn't see it flap. It simply glided silently over their heads and vanished. None of them had the words for what they'd seen, but by the end of the week, more would come forward, and the thing would no longer be alone. The first major sighting, the TNT area, November 15th. Roger and Linda Scarberry, along with Steve and Mary Millette, were driving near the old World War II munitions site outside Point Pleasant, a place locals called the TNT area. What they saw that night would be burned into their memories for the rest of their lives. They described a tall creature, nearly 7 feet high. Its wings were tucked behind it. Its eyes glowed red, not from reflected light, but from within. When their headlights hit it, the thing turned. It didn't run. It rose into the air, wings outstretched, and chased their car down the winding country roads at nearly 100 miles per hour. They didn't stop until they hit the city limits, and even then, they didn't look back. It's so... just one Sam. Sakailan sighting. It was over 100. Over the next year, sightings of the creature exploded. Men, women, children, teenagers out for joyrides, hunters, police officers, even a local contractor who claimed it landed on the roof of his pickup truck. Reports described it as a man with wings like a bat, no head, just eyes in its chest, 10-foot wingspan, no face, just those eyes, and always those glowing red eyes, burning like coals in the dark. The creature wasn't just spotted at night. In one case, it was seen standing by the side of the road during broad daylight. It didn't flee, it simply vanished. Witnesses often reported intense fear, nausea, or lost time after seeing it. Some described dreams before the sightings. Others claimed they felt called to certain places, like the creature wanted them to see it. And some never told anyone until years later, afraid of being dismissed. More than just a creature. The men in black arrive. As the sightings piled up, so did the strangeness. Journalists and researchers, most famously author and investigator John Keel, began looking into the reports. That's when the calls began. Phones would ring with no one on the other end, or voices that spoke in strange, robotic tones. Keel claimed he received prophecies of coming disasters. Others were warned not to speak. And then, the men in black appeared. Not the ones from movies. These men were unsettling, awkward, robotic. They wore outdated black suits. Their skin was pale, their hair unusually cut. They'd visit witnesses asking strange, unrelated questions or demanding silence. Some tried to impersonate military officers. Others claimed to be researchers or government agents, but had no credentials. People began to feel watched. Dogs barked at invisible things. Equipment malfunctioned. Time behaved strangely. Keel believed it wasn't just one creature being seen, but part of a larger, interdimensional intelligence, something ancient and alien to human understanding. The collapse, Silver Bridge, December 15th, 1967. At 5:04 p.m. on a frigid Friday evening, the Silver Bridge, connecting Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio, collapsed during rush hour traffic. 31 vehicles plunged into the icy Ohio River. 46 people died. It was sudden, violent, and entirely unexpected. The National Guard was called in. Divers worked in freezing water for days, retrieving bodies from the twisted wreckage. The town was traumatized. But those who'd followed the Mothman sightings couldn't help but notice the timing. The creature vanished after the collapse. No more sightings, no more glowing eyes in the woods. Just silence. Keel had predicted something terrible would happen that December, though he'd assumed it would be in a major city. In retrospect, many began to wonder, was Mothman a harbinger? A warning? Not a monster, but a messenger of death? What was the Mothman? To this day, no one knows. Some believe it was a misidentified bird, a sandhill crane or barred owl distorted by fear and folklore. Others say it was a tulpa, a creature born from collective belief, or a being from another world entirely. But there are stranger theories still, that it guards thresholds, appearing near nuclear facilities, war zones, or before great tragedies. That Mothman has been seen before other disasters. Chernobyl, the Fukushima, meltdown 9/11. Witnesses have surfaced, swearing they saw something in the smoke or on the rooftops. Maybe it's always watching. Maybe it's drawn to suffering. Or maybe it tries to stop it. But here's the part. The movies never told you. Sightings never truly stopped. What's still reported? Today. In the hills around Point Pleasant, stories still circulate. Late-night truckers on back roads report a massive winged shadow that keeps pace with them in the mist. Hikers vanish for hours and return disoriented. Hunters find deer stripped of flesh, but no blood. Locals see eyes, red eyes, staring at them from tree lines. And every year, people gather in Point Pleasant for the Mothman Festival. They come for fun, costumes, stories. But some come with more serious intentions. They whisper of recent sightings. They show photos. They speak of dreams that lead them to the woods. And they always speak of those eyes. Because the truth is, you don't find Mothman. It finds you. Whatever it is, whatever it was never just a creature. It was a question, with wings, a warning carved into the sky, and somewhere, out there, in the quiet hours before dawn, it's still waiting, watching, for the next time we won't listen. It was November 5th, 1975. A crew of 7 loggers had just finished a long day of cutting trees in the remote forests of the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest near Snowflake, Arizona. They packed up their tools, climbed into an old red pickup truck, and began the long, winding drive back toward civilization, headlights barely cutting through the towering ponderosa pines. The sun had dipped behind the mountains, and the forest grew dense with shadow. Then, they saw it. A light, hovering above the clearing. It didn't move like a helicopter. It didn't resemble any plane. It pulsed. It hummed. And when one of them, Travis Walton, stepped out of the truck to get a closer look, he disappeared in a flash of blue light. This isn't the plot of a science fiction movie. This is the real case behind Fire in the Sky. And to this day, it remains one of the most thoroughly documented, most controversial, and most bone-chilling UFO abduction cases in American history. The incident, 7 men, 1 light, and an impossible truth. Mike Rogers was behind the wheel when it all began. The crew had been quiet, tired, but when they saw the glow above the ridge, conversation died. It was orange at first, like a fire hanging in midair. Then they got closer and saw a disc-shaped craft floating silently just above the forest floor. Travis Walton, 22 years old and known for being curious, sometimes to a fault, got out. He walked right toward it. The others shouted for him to stop, to come back, but he didn't. And then, without warning, the light struck him. A beam, so bright it turned not today, lifted him off the ground and hurled him backward like a rag doll. He hit the forest floor and lay motionless. In a panic, the other 6 men peeled out, gravel flying, the truck fishtailing through the woods. When they finally stopped, miles down the road, breathless and terrified, they realized he wasn't behind them. They turned around, but when they returned to the spot, Travis Walton was gone. No light, no sound, no sign of struggle, just silence. And cold air humming with something they couldn't name. The search, small town. Panic and suspicion. When the men arrived back in Snowflake, they were pale, shaking, barely able to speak. They went straight to the sheriff's office and told their story. Sheriff Marlon Gillespie and Deputy Ellison listened carefully. They took notes, and then they didn't believe a word of it. They thought it was a cover story, that Walton had been murdered, that maybe it had been a fight among the crew, or a terrible accident they were trying to bury. A massive search party was dispatched. Helicopters combed the forest. Dogs were brought in. The logging crew was questioned again and again. But there was no blood, no signs of foul play, and the crew never changed their story. So the authorities upped the stakes. They brought in polygraph tests. The polygraph results, the men under the microscope. 5 of the 6 crew members agreed to take a polygraph administered by state law enforcement. The results were unanimous. They were telling the truth. One test was declared inconclusive due to stress, but the rest passed. No deception detected. The examiner himself, Cy Gilson, one of Arizona's top polygraph experts, later said that in his opinion the men were being completely honest about what they saw. Still, the media called them liars. The town whispered that they were drunks or attention seekers. Some said it was all a hoax for money. But there was still one problem. Travis Walton was gone for 5 full days. The return, 5 days later. Then, on November 10th, a payphone rang in the town of Heber, Arizona, 30 miles away from the abduction site. The voice on the other end was weak, scared, confused. It was Travis. He was found curled up in a phone booth, dehydrated, emaciated, and terrified. When his family arrived, he clung to them like a child. He kept repeating one word: they. He was hospitalized, examined, and questioned. And slowly, the story began to emerge. The missing time, inside the craft. Travis Walton described waking up in a small metallic room surrounded by short humanoid figures. Not the classic grays from Hollywood films, but eerily similar. Large heads, dark eyes, slender limbs. He said they didn't speak, not with words, but he could feel their intentions. They were studying him, calm, methodical. He panicked, fought, and was eventually rendered unconscious again. When he woke again, he was lying by the side of the road near Haber. 5 days had passed. He had lost weight, and the hair on his chest had grown less than it should have. Missing time, altered biology, burned memories, and no one, not even the government, could explain it. The story made national headlines, TV interviews, magazine spreads, book deals, debunkers, believers, investigators. Skeptics said Travis faked it, that he hid out in a cabin and made the whole thing up. But no one could explain how he disappeared for 5 days without a trace, in the middle of a forest that had been scoured by professionals. They couldn't explain the polygraphs, or the physiological effects, or the corroborated eyewitness testimony from 6 other men, none of whom ever changed their story, even after nearly 5 decades. To this day, Travis Walton stands by every word. He's taken multiple polygraphs since and passed. He's testified at conferences, spoken before scientists, endured ridicule and admiration alike. But the questions remain. So what really happened? Did Travis Walton board a craft not of this earth? Was it a shared hallucination, a hoax, or was it something far more terrifying? Something real, but something interdimensional. Something watching from behind the curtain of our reality, slipping through only when the timing is right, and leaving behind just enough evidence to make us question everything. The authorities still won't say the government denies involvement, and the case remains officially unexplained. But one thing is undeniable. Something happened in those woods, and no one, not the police, not the media, not the most hardened skeptics, has ever been able to prove otherwise. Stories like this, they aren't just stories. They're puzzle pieces, fragments of a deeper truth that most people would rather ignore. But here at MindFuel, we don't look away. We ask the questions others are afraid to ask. We trace the horrors that hide behind headlines. We shine a light into the darkest forests of truth, myth, and memory. So if you're ready to face what's really out there, if you're not content with the sanitized version, if you want truth wrapped in shadow and fact fused with fear, subscribe to MindFuel, because this is just the beginning. In 1974, a single mother of 4 living in Culver City, California, became the epicenter of one of the most terrifying and controversial paranormal cases in modern American history. Her name wasn't Carla Moran. That was the name given to her in the film that followed. Her real name was Doris Bither. And what happened to her behind the walls of a modest, weather-worn home on Braddock Drive wasn't just a haunting. It was a siege, unrelenting, violent, sexual. This wasn't footsteps in the hallway or doors creaking open. This was being pinned to the bed by something invisible. This was the air being torn apart by growls that had no throat to rise from. This was bruises forming where no hands could be seen. It wasn't just a ghost story. It was a case that would attract parapsychologists from UCLA, scientists, journalists, skeptics, and believers alike. Because something was happening inside that house. And no one, not the experts, not the priests, not even the mother herself, could stop it. A mother haunted. The first assault. Doris Bither was in her early 30s, divorced, struggling, raising 4 children on her own. Neighbors described her as kind, if reclusive. But her life took a brutal turn when, late one summer night, she was suddenly and violently attacked in her bedroom. She claimed that an unseen force climbed onto her, held her down, and sexually assaulted her. She could feel the weight of it, hear it breathing, smell something sour and electric in the air. And then, it was gone. At first, she thought it was a waking nightmare, a hallucination born from trauma or exhaustion. But then it happened again, and again. And this time, Her children saw it too. A house under siege, eyewitness testimony. Her teenage son Brian was the first to speak publicly. He described seeing his mother thrown across the room by nothing. He described lights flickering wildly, appliances bursting open, objects flying. He remembered one afternoon when 3 separate apparitions materialized in front of them, fog-like figures with vague human outlines. One larger, 2 smaller. They radiated hate, and the entire house was permeated by the sound of something breathing that shouldn't have lungs. The children began sleeping in the living room. They begged their mother to leave, but Doris was paralyzed, financially, emotionally, and spiritually. So instead of fleeing, she called for help. UCLA, parapsychology involvement. Science enters the house. This is where the story becomes even more chilling. Doris contacted Dr. Barry Taff and Carrie Gaynor, 2 researchers from UCLA's parapsychology lab. They agreed to investigate. They expected cold spots, electromagnetic fields, maybe some EVP recordings. What they found was far worse. Within moments of entering the house, they reported being overcome by pressure. Not emotional pressure, physical, like walking into a vacuum. They set up cameras, thermographic film, and they began a weeks-long investigation. The team witnessed floating orbs, luminous green arcs darting through the air, objects moving without human contact, mysterious foul odors appearing and vanishing, and on one occasion a fog-like form hovering above Doris as she screamed for help. Photographic evidence was captured, blurred, chaotic images, but undeniably something. But the most terrifying detail? Every scientific instrument, electromagnetic readers, tape recorders, barometers, malfunctioned the moment the activity began. As if whatever it was knew how to hide. Not just physical. The psychological breakdown. Doris Bither didn't just endure physical attacks. She became mentally unwell. Her speech would shift mid-sentence as if someone else were speaking through her. Her moods swung violently. She became paranoid. She swore the entity followed her, whispering threats, mocking her in the voice of her long-dead father. One night, she collapsed in her hallway, her body covered in deep bruises, her hair singed as if by electrical fire. Doctors ran every test they could. No signs of epilepsy, no drugs, no explanation, just trauma, endless trauma, and a woman who said over and over, "They won't stop." 3 entities, the theory. Behind the assaults, according to researchers, Doris wasn't being haunted by a single ghost. She was being tormented by 3 distinct entities. One was dominant, aggressive, and powerful. The others seemed to act as observers or accomplices. Some theories pointed toward incubus and succubus mythology, sexual demons known to torment humans at night. Others suggested poltergeist phenomena triggered by intense emotional trauma, often linked to adolescent psychic energy. But this case didn't fit either cleanly. The activity wasn't limited to one room. It followed Doris when she moved. And even when she briefly relocated to San Bernardino, reports of attacks continued. The question became less about what is it, and more about why her. Science, skepticism, and the unanswered. Despite the extensive documentation, UCLA was eventually forced to abandon the case. There was no funding, no official recognition, no way to replicate the events in a lab. To this day, critics claim Doris was delusional, that it was mental illness, or a hoax. But they can't explain the photos. They can't explain the dozens of third-party witnesses. They can't explain why seasoned researchers risked their careers to report what they saw. Doris Bither died in 1999. Her children scattered, and the house in Culver City, it's still standing. Locals say it's been renovated, painted over, made pretty, but that house holds secrets no coat of paint can cover. The film versus the reality. The 1982 film The Entity dramatized Doris's story under the pseudonym Carla Moran. It presented a Hollywood version, darker, stylized, and with a climactic confrontation between science and spirit. But it didn't show the full toll. It didn't capture the months of terror. It didn't capture the slow erosion of sanity, the hopelessness of being hurt by something no one else could see, and no one else could stop. Because in real life, there was no exorcism, no triumphant escape. There was only a woman who kept waking up bruised, afraid, and increasingly alone. And a question that hangs in the air still: what kind of force can break the rules of physics and still vanish before the police arrive? The case of Doris Bither is more than a footnote in paranormal history. It's a mirror, a crack in our understanding, a wound we don't know how to close. If the story is true, then nothing is safe. Not our beds, not our minds, not the bodies we call our own. At MindFuel, we don't sanitize the truth. We don't skip the horror behind the headlines. We go where others won't. We chase the real stories that inspired the films. We follow the trails the skeptics won't touch. And we uncover the facts the studios dare not include. Because truth is always scarier than fiction. So if you're ready to keep exploring the cases they warned you about, if you want more than just campfire stories, subscribe to MindFuel. And brace yourself, because up next, we enter Burkittsville, Maryland, and we meet the missing. Madrid, Spain, June 1991. A working-class neighborhood called Vallecas, an apartment complex that, to anyone walking by, looked like every other. Concrete walls, narrow balconies, loud with life and laughter. But on the first floor of one particular building lived a family who would, over the course of a few short months, fall into a nightmare so disturbing, so unshakably strange, that even Spanish police would sign off on the impossible. This wasn't Hollywood. This wasn't a found footage film or clever viral marketing. This was real. A girl died. A mother begged for help. And an official report, filed by the police chief himself, described the scene in the most chilling terms imaginable. Inexplicable phenomena. Who was Veronica? Her name was Estefania Gutierrez Lazaro. But the world would come to know her, through film, rumor, and folklore, as Veronica. She was 15, bright, caring, protective, the kind of big sister that wakes up early to help with breakfast and stays up late to calm her siblings' nightmares. Her father had died suddenly not long before. Her mother was working long hours to support the family. And in that fragile space, where grief, adolescence, and a thirst for connection meet, Veronica made a decision that would change everything. The seance. A portal opens. It was the day of a solar eclipse, June 13th, 1991. While most students gathered outside with their paper viewers, Veronica and two friends stayed behind in a dark classroom. They had a Ouija board. The plan was simple. Contact Veronica's late father. Say goodbye. Get closure. But the moment the plan began, everything went wrong. Witnesses say the glass planchette began to move wildly. The room grew heavy, the air electric. One girl began to weep uncontrollably. Another screamed that she saw shadows crawling on the ceiling. And Veronica? She went still. Her eyes rolled back, her body convulsed. Then she let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed. The board shattered, and nothing was ever normal again. Back at home, the haunting begins. At first, it was small things, objects disappearing, lights flickering, cold drafts in rooms with no open windows. But then came the scratches, across Veronica's arms and back. Then the voices, low and whispering, speaking in a language no one recognized. Her siblings said she would talk in her sleep, but not like a teenager. It's like she was arguing with something, her younger brother later said. something that didn't have a voice of its own. At night, the family heard banging on the walls. Their dog barked at empty corners, and Veronica, once warm and full of laughter, became distant, terrified. Escalation. The descent into madness. Soon. It wasn't just nighttime that brought fear. Veronica said she felt something watching her every moment of every day, that she could see it in mirrors, feel it breathing when she closed her eyes. She would randomly burst into tears, collapse from seizures. One moment she'd be helping her mother fold laundry. The next, staring into a corner, unblinking, her mouth silently moving. She drew disturbing images, tall figures, black eyes, mouths full of teeth. Her mother, increasingly worried, took her to doctors. They ran EEGs, scans, blood work. All of it came back normal. But Veronica wasn't normal. Not anymore. The siblings, witnesses to the unseen. Her little brothers and sister, barely out of kindergarten, began reporting their own horrors. Toys moved on their own. Doors slammed shut and locked. At one point, their mattresses were found slashed open from the inside. And they swore they saw a dark figure standing over their sister's bed at night. One time, Veronica woke up screaming, her skin covered in burns. Her mother smelled something burning, though there was nothing in the kitchen and nothing outside. Just that feeling of being watched by something ancient and hungry. The final day, August 1991. On August 1st, Veronica got up like any other day. She helped get the younger children ready. She kissed her mother goodbye. She laughed for the first time in weeks, but that evening, she collapsed, convulsing, foaming at the mouth, her lips moving rapidly as if arguing with something unseen. They rushed her to the hospital. She slipped into a coma, and a few hours later, she was dead. Cause of death: sudden cardiac arrest of unknown origin. No drugs, no trauma, no illness, just gone. The aftermath: police intervention. The family was devastated. But the horror didn't end there. After Veronica's death, the activity in the apartment escalated. Shadowy figures, sudden fires, terrifying voices. The mother, now alone, called the police. And when officers arrived, what they found shocked even hardened professionals. Doors opened and slammed by themselves. An unplugged radio turned on, blaring. A crucifix had been violently torn from the wall. And in the hallway, a cold spot so strong it frosted their breath in the dead of summer. This is all detailed in the official police report. The lead officer, Jose Pedro Negri, later said, "I don't know how to explain what we saw that night, but it was real, and it was evil. The truth? Or something beyond it?" Skeptics argue that it was mass hysteria, that grief and trauma caused hallucinations, that a teenage girl, lost in sorrow, somehow caused her own spiral. But there's no medical explanation for what happened to Veronica. No psychological model that explains what those officers reported, and no theory, rational or otherwise, that explains why that apartment remained haunted for years. The case remains open, technically unresolved. And Veronica? She's buried in Madrid, but her name still causes chills across Spain. In 2017, Netflix released a film titled Veronica, based loosely on this case. It dramatized events, reimagined details, but what they couldn't show, what they dared not show, was the truth of that police report. Because when law enforcement acknowledges the presence of something paranormal, we are forced to ask questions we don't want to hear the answers to. Here at MindFuel, we believe horror shouldn't be reduced to entertainment. It should be explored, dissected, understood. We don't just tell ghost stories. We tell the stories behind the stories, the ones based on real documents, real deaths, real cries for help that echoed into the dark and were answered by something. So if you're ready to uncover more cases the world tried to forget, subscribe to MindFuel and don't look away. Because next, we step into the woods, where 3 students vanished, and the cameras kept rolling. By now, you've heard the stories. You've walked through decades of dread, behind the silver screen's flickering veil. But let's stop pretending. Let's stop pretending these were just films, that these were just the overactive imaginations of writers in a Hollywood studio, or clever edits stitched together in a sound booth. Because we both know, that's not where this ends. That's not where it ever began. Let's go back to the beginning. The Exorcist, the supposed invention of a possessed little girl. Except, it wasn't a girl. It was a boy named Roland Doe. And there are still pages of Jesuit records sealed in the archives, too disturbing for public release. The police officer who watched the bed shake. The nurses who watched words appear on flesh. The priests who lived, and the ones who didn't. That wasn't a screenplay. That was a last resort. Poltergeist? The set cursed by real bones. The actress who died unexpectedly just before the final reshoots. Coincidence? Possibly. But then there's The Conjuring, based not on fiction, but the notes of 2 real demonologists, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Their tapes, never released in full, tell a story of a family that wasn't just haunted, but hunted by something older than belief. We showed you Ed Gein's house. We walked through the Texarkana night where couples died in parked cars. We saw the fear etched into the police reports of Carla Moran, the recorded screams of people who went missing near Point Pleasant. These aren't campfire tales. These were investigated, testified to, filed, recorded, buried. So what happens when you dig them up? What happens when you stop watching and start looking? We've shown you real photos, played real audio, quoted from real reports, and we've only scratched the surface. But the question you need to ask yourself now is simple. What if these weren't just stories? Let that hang there a moment. Let it settle in your chest. Let the quiet remind you that even in your own home in the middle of the night when the screen goes black, you're not as alone as you think. Because maybe these films weren't fiction. Maybe they were warnings. Here at MindFuel, we don't deal in urban legends. We bring you the real cases that inspired the movies that kept you up at night. And we're not done yet. If you want to dig deeper into the unsolved possession that inspired the exorcism of Emily Rose, into the tragedy in Japan that made The Grudge feel far too real, into the cursed objects, the silent towns, the videotapes that no one watches twice, then Volume 2 is coming, and you're going to want to be here when it does. So hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and when the next story begins, don't turn. Office the lights. These stories weren't meant to entertain. They were cries for help, echoes of what really happened behind closed doors. And if even half of what you've heard is true, then maybe horror films aren't as fictional as we hoped. Maybe, just maybe, they're warnings. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. And remember, the scariest part of any horror story is what they don't show on screen. Until next time, stay aware, stay curious, and keep fueling your nightmares with MindFuel.